A real Southern murder mystery. Okay, let's break this down with Court TV crime and justice reporter Ted Rowlands and Lieutenant Colonel Adam Lee with the Atlanta Police Department Major Crimes Unit. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. Ted, I'm going to start with you. This was clearly a very tumultuous relationship, and it looks like from our package, the parents even had a clue in.
Yeah, absolutely. On the outside, it looked great. You know, they had 2 kids. It was a blended marriage. Each brought a child, same age, together. The kids got along by all accounts. But behind closed doors, behind this facade of these jewelry business owners, there was heavy drinking, drug use, and consistent arguing. And that is going to be a big part of this case for the prosecution to establish that Michael Collucci had motive to kill his wife.
Okay, but you know, Lou, Ted and I, we're Northerners, okay? But you're here, you're in the South, so you know this kind of flavor. These marriages, is it almost like that's how the South is? Make everything, appearances are great, but then looking behind the curtain, we see so much more.
I think it happens everywhere. I actually was a part of several investigations where you had well-to-do individuals who put on this facade that everything was perfect in their marriage, and when they're out in public, everyone thinks they're in love, and then behind closed doors, there's a lot more to it, especially when you combine drugs and alcohol use with the whole picture.
I don't understand, at least at this point, because we're still so early in the trial, but Ted, I know you were covering this for a while. It took them a year to arrest him, and I'm just not clear.
I think it's the manner of death. The big thing for the prosecution here is they don't have the manner of death where they want it. You know, they needed that to be determined by the coroner as a homicide, and there was a change in leadership. We saw that, you know, there was a change in terms of who's going to lead this investigation. It doesn't make sense. I mean, initially there were suspicions. The guy's got a fat lip, and he's sitting right there. There was initial suspicions from the moment they were called, and yet it took almost a year for them to finally charge him with murder. And that's a huge part of this case. It gives Savage, who is an unbelievable attorney, huge opportunity to pick away.
Right, but Lieutenant, isn't it true that often in these type of cases, when you're not directly pointed to a suspect, the first people you look at are the family members? Absolutely.
Whenever you have a spousal murder, the spouse is the #1 suspect. That's just the way it is, especially in this age that we live in now, when we've seen so many cases like this where a husband murders a wife, wife murders a husband, and so that husband or that wife become the #1 suspect, and your job as an investigator is to eliminate them before you move on to anybody else.
Well, it took them a long time, and then they finally pegged it on him. Okay, so let's talk about the crime scene a little bit. The first witness to testify was William Brooks All. He's a patrolman with the Moncks Corner Police Department, and he had this to say in describing the crime scene on direct examination.
She was laying on her back on a concrete slab. Her feet were near the chain link fence. There was a door approximately on the other side of her. She appeared to be discolored, and there was a hose in the area that was laying near her that was also wrapped around the top of a chain link fence. In that hose, I did note I saw some blonde hair in the hose. The victim's hair color was blonde.
Ted, can you expound a little bit on what was at the crime scene when her body was found?
So she's up against a fence, basically, and this is a fence that she would have had to have kind of squeezed around, which we've heard a little bit about, but we're going to hear more about that. And then she was laying in a prone, almost a turned position when they got there, which
and her body was contorted a little, right?
Yeah, which contradicts the idea that Collucci was performing CPR, because it's just basic to have the person flat if you're performing CPR on them, which he claims that's what he was doing. That's why he had that mouth injury. He says he cut his lip performing CPR.
Well, okay, yeah. So talking about, he says,
and then you have this hose that you're seeing
blood
right
on
now.
His lip, which he said getting CPR. Okay, and what are we looking at?
This is the hose here.
This is the hose.
Collucci says that she hung herself with, or Savage is alluding to, possibly squeezing through the fence to go urinate. She is drunk and accidentally somehow gets her head in the hose and strangles herself.
I think we need to take judicial notice of the fact that there was probably a bathroom in the jewelry store. But I heard Savage is trying to establish this narrative
was a habit that she- yes.
it's some habit. But I know this is anecdotal. I've performed CPR twice. You probably have performed
I have,
CPR, Lieutenant.
many times.
I've never had any lip bleeding. That's never happened to me. And also, they could have tested her mouth to see if his DNA was on his mouth, which would also corroborate whether he in fact gave CPR. I haven't read anything about that type of evidence, so we'll see if that comes out during this trial.
Yeah, can I interject there?
Of
a little bit?
course.
The only problem with that, they would have explained that away with a kiss or something. You know, they had some passion before
Whoa,
they, you know.
okay, but I think somebody's going to say these two were
Right.
bickering and there was no room for
yeah.
any of that
understand
smoochiness.
that.
But you're right. I completely agree. But Lieutenant, from looking at the crime scene and how it was assessed, what are your thoughts? And this is something you have experience with. This is your wheelhouse.
My thoughts are that I really have a problem with believing that she committed suicide based on a lot of the evidence that exists there. And I also have a problem with that it was some freak accident. So I'm leaning in the direction of a homicide based on everything that I have before me.
Yeah, and adding to, Ted, what you had said about his injuries, so police officers at the scene, they noted signs of a struggle, a broken fingernail in the car, broken sunglasses, a cracked phone screen. I don't know if we knew, was his phone screen cracked before?
That's the problem with a cracked phone screen. People keep phones that are cracked for years
Well,
because they don't want.
None of us want to go to the
Deal
phone
with it.
store. Okay, so we're going to continue this discussion, more of our Southern murder mystery in South Carolina after this.
Talked about going to a home, a halfway house, or a home for women, battered women. And that light came on in my head because that was exactly what she had said to me. And then she said, "Mama, don't hang up, don't hang up, Mama, don't hang up, now don't hang up." And I was cut off, and I could never get her back. I tried calling her and calling her and calling her and could not. I never got her. She was dead 2 hours later.
That was Sarah Collucci's mom describing the last time that she spoke with her daughter. Welcome back to Court TV Live and our gavel-to-gavel coverage of South Carolina versus Michael Collucci. Michael and Sarah Collucci were married in 2012. It was the second marriage for both of them, and each of them had a young daughter that they brought into this blended family. Now, by all appearances, Sarah and Michael, they seemed happy. However, after her death, investigators discovered Sarah had serious alcohol issues and a deeply troubled marriage. And now her husband, Michael Collucci, he's facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison if he's convicted of her murder. Let's take you back inside the courtroom for more of Special Agent David Owen's testimony about where Michael and Sarah Collucci were the day of her death.
Now, if I told my wife last night I stayed at home and I really was in Columbia and nobody knew that I was there or where I really was, how would a special agent figure out where I was?
Could you use credit card receipts to see if she stayed in hotels or purchasing gas for vehicles, cell phone reports?
This phone will tell this jury where I was at 8 o'clock this morning,
Yes, sir.
8 o'clock last night,
Yes, sir.
Christmas Eve last year.
If you had that phone then, yes, sir.
Did you have Mr. Collucci's phone?
Yes, sir.
Did you have Mrs. Collucci's phone?
Yes, sir.
Where had they been that day?
Where had they been that day?
Yes.
I know they were downtown. Mr. Collucci was meeting with an attorney, a different attorney on another matter. Miss Sarah Collucci was with him.
And how did you know
They
that?
went to Magnolia Cemetery
How do you know that?
from phone records, from the forensic phone dump.
To give you the location of where they were?
Did it give me the location?
Yes.
No, sir.
Well, how then from the phone records would you know where they were?
From text messages between Sarah Collucci and her mother and some other acquaintances.
So we have absolute, unless somebody was lying in the text messages, no reason to do that, correct? But you can take this phone, or Miss Collucci's phone, or Mr. Collucci's phone, and you can extract information from this phone or from the Verizon service or whoever, and we can tell where every one of these jurors were 3 weeks ago if they had their phone with them.
Yes, sir.
Not based on their messages, but on the technology of tower triangulation to say exactly where they were at what time.
Yes, sir.
24 hours a day, 60 minutes out of the hour, 60 seconds out of the minute.
Yes, sir.
Because this phone right now, as we stand here, is bouncing information to 3 different towers amongst corner.
Yes, sir.
So a year from now, you can say I was standing right here, based on my telephone.
If the company kept the data for a year, yes, sir.
And that's how long they keep them, a year. Correct?
Some companies differ in policies.
What was the policy in this case?
I did not get cell phone records from the company on this case.
So when you got the information from Michael Collucci of where he had been that day, as you have related to the jury, there was no question he was telling the truth.
From his cell phone text messages and from Sarah Collucci's cell phone text messages, they both indicated that they were in an attorney's office in downtown Charleston. I do know that they had civil litigation going on and had a meeting with that attorney.
The question was, based on what Michael Collucci told you where he had been that day, was no reason to disbelieve him.
Michael Collucci did not tell me where he was that day.
He didn't.
No, sir, he did
Did he
not.
tell others?
He told others that he was downtown in the attorney's office.
And he was there for purposes unrelated to anything between him and his wife other than they were suing a school district.
It was legal matters, yes, sir.
Yeah, but you don't infer anything that was, did you talk to
It was civil.
Did you talk to the attorney?
No, I did not.
Did you talk to his receptionist?
No, I did not.
So I guess you believed him when he said where he was.
I had Michael and Sarah Collucci both telling me they were downtown, meeting with the attorney on
And-
both of their phones.
And did you know that they had gone to a liquor store on East Bay Street?
I had heard they went to a liquor store, but I did not know which one.
And did you interview anybody at the liquor store?
Not that liquor store, no, sir.
Or some other liquor store you did?
Yes,
Were
sir.
they there that day?
No, sir.
But the liquor store they went to that day, did you interview those people?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay, we got to jump out of court for just a minute, but next up, continued cross-examination, and my colleague Yodit Tuwalde joins me on the couch.
Tonight on Court TV.
Opening statements in a brand new trial on Court TV. Sarah Collucci was found dead with a garden hose wrapped around her neck. Her husband's been charged with murder, but he says his wife died either by suicide or by accident. Plus, we'll take you inside the Kevin Spacey case as the defense makes accusations against the accuser.
Closing arguments with Vinnie Politan. Tonight, starting at 6/5 Central on the all-new Court TV.
The most painful thing that I learned is that my daughter's ashes sat 6 months on a shelf in a funeral home, and all they had to be was picked up. That was very painful to me.
That was Sarah Collucci's mom talking about the pain of losing her daughter. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Seema Iyer, and we are covering South Carolina versus Michael Collucci. He's a jewelry businessman accused of strangling his wife, Sarah. The couple appeared to be running a successful business in Charleston, South Carolina, but behind closed doors, their marriage was in trouble with excessive drinking, drugs, and vicious name-calling. On the day she died, Michael and Sarah Collucci were supposed to visit the cemetery where her first husband was buried. The day was significant because it was the anniversary of Sarah's marriage to that first husband. Now, let's take you back inside the courtroom as defense attorney Andrew Savage continues his cross-examination of Special Agent David Owen.
They went to Magnolia Cemetery.
Yes, sir, they did.
For what purpose?
I'm assuming so she could visit her deceased husband's grave.
Did she do that often?
From what I'm understanding, yes, she did.
And Michael would accompany her?
From what I understand, yes.
Because she was obsessed, my words, not yours, with the death of her husband, second husband.
Yes.
Now, did you go back to the Magnolia Cemetery and interview the management of the cemetery or any of the employees?
I did not go back to Magnolia Cemetery. In Sarah Collucci's phone, there was a search for Magnolia Cemetery and a call to, I think, 2 calls to the office in attempts to contact someone.
From Sarah Collucci's phone?
Yes.
And did you go at any time to Magnolia Cemetery to see where husband number 2 had been buried?
No, I have not.
Did you know whether there was an agreement not to, where he was interred, not to inter anybody else between him and the waterway?
I am not aware of that agreement, no, sir.
Are you aware there was lots of mud there in May of 2015 because they were doing landfill?
Yes, sir.
And of course you took samples of that dirt so that the dirt could be removed from the shoes of either Mr. Collucci or Mrs. Collucci to confirm the accuracy of the information provided.
I don't think there was any question that they were there, so I did not analyze the dirt to prove or disprove.
How long were they there?
I do not know that.
Did they go to a gas station when they left there?
I do not know that.
Have you heard that?
No, sir.
Nobody's told you that?
No, sir.
Wouldn't it be interesting for the jury to know what went on in that time frame?
It would be.
So the route, if you were at Magnolia Cemetery and you were heading to Somerville, how would you get there?
Depends on what section of Somerville.
I'm going to the location known as
From downtown, I would normally take 26, get off at College Park Road and travel College Park up to 17A.
And supposing you traveled up to 199 and got off at 17.
That's another possible route, yes,
That's
sir.
the road on which 17 is the road on which is actually.
Yes, sir.
How many accidents were there on I-26 that day?
I do not know that, but being a weekday rush hour, I'm sure there were multiple accidents.
And other than just guessing or speculating, this is a murder case.
Yes, sir.
Other than just guessing or speculating, the highway department keeps records of how many accidents there were so that we could say, gee, you know, at midnight I can travel from Remount Road, or I can travel from down the city to such and such a location in 15 minutes, more or less, or whatever that is. But if I'm traveling in rush hour, these accidents would slow down what's already a congested area.
Yes, sir.
So, but there was no interest in that?
No, sir.
Were you aware that the pathologist that you've referenced who did the autopsy had another doctor present at the autopsy?
I am not aware of that.
Have you looked at the autopsy protocol?
I've looked, not the protocol, I've looked at the report.
That's the protocol.
Okay.
That's what they call it. So on that, it would list who was present,
Yes, sir.
and there is a second doctor who was there.
I believe Dr. Tormos was the presiding pathologist, and my experience in attending autopsies is they have some doctors in training that are also present.
Do you know what a prosector is?
The prosector, that's the autopsy technician that actually dissects.
The one who does the cutting.
Yes, sir.
And did you know that another doctor did those cuttings?
No, sir.
That doctor hasn't been interviewed?
No, sir.
Did you know that after the autopsy was completed and no manner of death can be determined, that Dr. Tormos consulted with the head of the Department of Pathology and 3 other forensic pathologists about what happened?
That Dr. Tormos consulted them? No, I
Yes.
do not know that.
Did you know that another pathologist independent of the medical university, the 4 at the medical university, and a 5th one then examined the body?
I know there were some other pathologists involved, but I did not receive a report from them. I did not talk to them, and I did not request that they review.
But you are aware that a minimum of 5 trained.
Objection. Outside the scope of this witness's knowledge, and he needs to call the appropriate witnesses to lay this foundation.
Sustained foundation.
Sustained foundation. Okay, time to bring in my Court TV co-anchor Yodit Tualde, because you're from down south, so you may get a good feeling for Mr. Savage, because it seems like he is doing a remarkable job, and he's lulling us all into this feeling of Southern comfort right now.
He's smooth. He's smooth. You don't see any hostility that you typically see with cross-examinations. Right. He's keeping it very cool, calm, and collected, and he's making this witness not look so good. What do you know, sir? What are you here for? Why are you here to testify? And all you're getting from this cross-examination is what the state didn't do.
And he does it in a way which is remarkable also, because it's not offensive.
It's not offensive.
Yeah.
It's almost like you don't even know that you're actually taking the bait.
Yeah.
You don't know it because he's so cool with it.
Exactly.
And you want to be, I don't know, he just comes off very, very likable.
You know, this last line of questioning, he's asking this investigator, David Owen, from the Special Agent, South Carolina Law Enforcement Department, lead investigator for this homicide. He's asking him about the autopsy, and he's asking him, okay, did you interview the pathologist? Did you know there were 5 pathologists involved? This seems outside the scope, because why is it the investigator's job to interview the pathologist? The prosecutor goes to the pathologist. It's not the investigator who has to interview every other primary witness in a case.
Mm-hmm. Which is probably why the objection got sustained. But I mean, I guess his line of questioning for this particular witness is because he is the lead investigator. And so he would maybe wants the jury to assume, maybe this is a tactic, that he's the lead investigator in this murder. He should know every aspect of this investigation. And he doesn't even know that her autopsy was performed by not 2, 3, but 4 other professional, whatever you would call them, because Seema, you're the expert when it comes to autopsy. Pathologists. But yeah, like you don't even know that, and you're the lead investigator. So that looks bad on his part.
So your point is, it's almost like us, as the attorney, we should know every single piece of paper in the file. We should know every single thing about the case, and so should he. So, but it's more than just, okay, you should know your file. It's almost as if he's expecting this investigator to know every single thing about Sarah and Michael. For instance, you were watching earlier today when he set up this whole line of questioning about Sarah having a propensity to urinate outside. And is this something, well, number one, we don't even know if it's true. But what do you think of the strategy for bringing it out?
Oh, it's brilliant. I don't think he expected him to actually answer with something factual. He wanted to get that out there for the jury. he wanted them to know she does actually have a propensity to go and pee outside, because they may connect the dots in terms of why the day of her death that Michael was in the car and she was out wherever she was. She perhaps needed to go to the bathroom, and this is where all of that kind of gets hazy and why they're in the courtroom
And
now.
you were saying that you knew, what was her intox level?
So apparently she was 3 times the legal limit with cocaine in her system as well. So you have that kind, and on the day of her first husband's anniversary. Of his death.
Right.
So it kind of makes sense that, you know, she'd feel somber, you know,
Right.
and maybe want to indulge in some drinking. But yeah, for her to be 3 times the legal limit and have cocaine in her system, and then possibly go and need to go urinate. I mean,
Right.
something may have happened there.
I think, like you said, brilliant strategy that this early on, we just started this trial today, and already he's setting up this narrative of the defense of accident. So she's emotional, she's intoxicated, inebriated, not sober, and it's more likely to trip over a hose.
Correct. And see, he doesn't even have to say all of that. And I think that that's what's brewing in the jurors' minds. And he did this from the outset. In his opening statements, he laid out way more. I'm talking 8 minutes worth of statements versus 4 minutes the state. And he was saying to the jurors, pay attention to this, that, more importantly, Sarah Lynn's lifestyle.
Okay, all right.
was telling.
Yodit Tawalda, you can catch her at the desk every day, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. More of our Southern mystery in South Carolina next.
Absolutely. Had I known it was drugs, he would have been a goner. After the fact, the drugs made sense. The pieces fell together. Bizarre behavior, being broke all the time.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Seema Iyer. Sarah Collucci's parents say they knew she tended to abuse alcohol, but they say they had no idea that she was using drugs. In fact, post-mortem toxicology tests revealed that Sarah Collucci had cocaine in her system, and she had nearly 3 times the state's blood alcohol limit of 0.08%. Let's take you back inside the courtroom for more cross-examination and redirect of the lead investigator who charged Michael Collucci with murder.
Are you the chief investigator of this case?
Yes, sir.
As the chief investigator, do you try to accumulate all the evidence you can so that if the case ever goes to trial, the jury can be informed of all material facts about the case?
Yes, I do.
In doing that, were you aware that other pathologists were involved other than Dr. Tormos?
Yes, I am.
Did you interview any of them?
I attempted to, and asked them to write a report, and they declined to write a report.
Beg the court's indulgence one moment.
Okay, Mr. Savage is going back to the defense table, perhaps consulting with his wife. Perhaps you've seen that Mr. Savage's wife is sitting at the defense table in between himself and Mr. Collucci. Now he's going over his notes. Maybe a lot of you have noticed Mr. Savage tends to do his cross-examinations without any notes. Let's go back inside the courtroom.
Into a couple months later, at least. When you'd read the reports from the Sheriff's Department, did you seek for further forensic evaluation of the evidence that was discovered that night?
Yes, I did.
For instance, an earring was found.
Yes, sir.
Was there any analysis of the earring?
I'd have to look back at the analysis report.
It was
submitted for processing.
There was a fingernail separately found from Mrs. Collucci that night.
The one found in the car, yes, sir.
Yes. Was that forensically examined?
I believe it was submitted. I'd have to look back at the report.
There was a pair of sunglasses that were found in the front seat of that car. Were they forensically examined?
Both sections of the broken glasses, yes, sir.
They were examined forensically?
Yes, sir.
Did you know that there was blood found on a cinder block adjacent to the fence?
Blood found on the cinder block? No, sir, I'm not aware of that.
Did you know that the first responders said they thought they saw some blood on the cinder block that was right beside the patient?
They thought they saw some blood on the...
Yes.
I believe I recall that, but I don't believe Berkeley County collected any blood or presumptive blood from the cinder block.
Cinder block, depending on where the blood was found, could be important in this case.
It could be, yes, sir.
Do you know whether it was documented by photograph?
It may be in photographs.
Are you aware of that?
I know the cinder block was photographed, yes.
So the speculation about the injuries to the knees, do you know how that was caused?
No, sir, I do not.
Was the area in which he fell paved area?
It was.
What is the difference in elevation as you go through that opening in the fence to where her body was found?
You'll have to define the opening. There's at least 2 openings. Which opening are you talking about?
The opening between the fence and the wall.
Okay.
What is the elevation of the terrain there? Is it a flat surface?
It's not a flat surface.
What is the elevation?
I don't know the exact elevation, but I know there's water runoff from the building that would cause the ground to be uneven. There's grass, there's dirt, and there's also pavement in that area.
Were you aware of the results of the autopsy toxicology report?
Yes, I am.
And you are aware that in 3 separate samples of peripheral blood, heart blood, and eye bodily fluid, that Ms. Collucci was had consumed over 3 times the amount of alcohol.
Yes, sir, I'm aware of that.
Her death.
I'm aware of that.
Where did she consume that alcohol?
I'm assuming with her husband.
Yeah, but that's an assumption.
Yes, sir.
What evidence do you have of when and where?
I don't have any evidence of when and where.
Were you aware that she was on substance abuse medication at the time of her death?
I know she was on some medication, yes, sir, but I do not know what it was prescribed for.
Do you know that she was had recently consumed cocaine?
Yes, sir, I do know that.
And as a result of that combination of drugs, do you know her state of sobriety at that time?
Objection?
Yes.
Outside the knowledge base of this witness, he's not an expert in toxicology and the effects of drug and alcohol.
Sustained speculation.
I guess you're not an expert on that area that I just talked to you about, but you're familiar with combination of alcohol, drugs, and cocaine.
I would say she was intoxicated.
And as a result of her consumption of medication, did you visit with her psychiatrist?
Yes, I did.
And did you learn from that visit that she was prescribed a substance abuse medication?
I'd have to refer back to my notes. I know he prescribed her, I believe, 2 different types of medications. I do not know what they are without referring back to my notes.
Did you then go to DHEC and try to find out how often and where and when, whether she was doctor shopping or pharmacy shopping and all, to take those so-called prescribed medications?
I went to DHEC first to get if she was prescribed any medications that were found in her system.
And there's abuse medications. There are medications that are sold on the street for abuse. Are you familiar with that?
There's multiple medications sold on the street for abuse, yes, sir.
Including the ones that she had consumed that day?
Yes.
When you visited the psychiatrist, was she being treated for acute depression?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Kindly answer any questions that the prosecutor might still have for you.
Agent Owen, did you rush to make an arrest in this case?
No, ma'am, I did not.
And were you involved in the original evidence collection?
No, ma'am, I was not.
And how long after original evidence collection did you become involved?
Close to 3 months.
And do you have any way to know what was actually going on in Sarah Collucci's mind on the day of the incident?
No, ma'am, I do not.
And in your review of this case, the records you obtained and the witnesses you spoke to, is it your understanding that Ms. Collucci went to the cemetery to visit the grave of her prior husband on previous occasions?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And as far as what happened that day, is it fair to say that you obtained or you talked to witnesses who had talked to Mr. Collucci about what happened that day?
Yes, ma'am.
And that he had provided statements to those witnesses or explanations?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it fair to say that those explanations were not all the same?
Correct, they were not.
Is it accurate to say that only the defendant and victim were present at the incident location at the time the first responders arrived?
Yes, that is fair to say.
Is it fair to say that first responders arrived within minutes of the 911 call being placed?
Yes, ma'am.
And in your review of the records, reports, and photos of the incident location, the hose in question, is it fair to say there were portions of the hose underneath the victim on the ground?
Yes.
Is it accurate to say there was no knot of the hose on the fence?
There was no knot.
In your training and experience and review of the photos of the scene, were there signs of a struggle inside the car?
Yes, ma'am.
Were there signs of a physical struggle by way of physical injury on the victim?
Yes, ma'am.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any objection? Oh, sorry, give me a second.
Thank you.
Based on the questions.
We'll give you some latitude, but nothing matters for that.
No, I'm going to ask directly on the point. The prosecutor asked you about signs of a struggle in the car.
Yes, sir.
And you said that there were signs of a struggle.
Yes, sir.
A pair of sunglasses that were broken.
Yes, sir.
Never examined the sunglasses to see what might have pressure or whether the screw was broken and the sunglasses weren't broken.
No, sir.
Examination that you can see in the photograph that the screw holding the sunglasses together is rusty. Correct? Or a new
Yes.
pair of sunglasses.
No, they were not new.
Fingernail of the...
There was a broken fingernail, yes.
But not broken.
Well,
It was detached from the finger,
it was detached from the finger, yes.
but not broken.
It was glued onto the finger, so some
they all
force, yeah, some force would have had to be applied to pull that off.
Yeah, what do people use their fingernails for in substance abuse?
A multitude of things.
Yeah, snorting cocaine. Correct?
I've never snorted cocaine, so I don't know.
Oh, and in all your 23 years, you didn't know that.
I've never seen anybody snort it except on TV.
So in the car, a sign of disturbance in a fight, cigarette ashes, were they disturbed?
There were cigarette ashes everywhere in the car.
But was there any pattern in them that they had been a struggle and they were disturbed?
I didn't look for a pattern in the cigarette ashes.
2 Coca-Cola cans that were open?
They were in cup holders.
Were they disturbed?
Not to my observations, no.
The little flap in between the driver and the passenger seat, little thing that you reach in to put your cup in or whatever, was it disturbed?
There were a lot of papers strewn about the car, so I don't know what was disturbed beforehand or afterhand when it comes to papers being around the cups in the center of the car.
Political signs for the sheriff?
There were political signs for an opponent, yes.
And it was the car sort of what people might say was a pig pen.
The car was a
Stuff was
mess.
strewn all about it, but it wasn't.
The back seat, yes.
But there's no sign that it was a disturbance that resulted in the documents or the items being thrown about. And the dust that covered the dashboard and the dust and the ashes and the little console was not disturbed at all. And there were no cracked windshields, there was no footprints on the dashboard where somebody would have kicked or somebody would have done something of some violent nature.
No, sir.
Just like there weren't any scratch marks that somebody tried to remove a ligature around their neck.
No, sir.
None. Thanks.
Any further questions from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Sir, you may step in.
The mystery surrounding Sarah Collucci's murder continues after this.
Tonight on Court TV.
Opening statements in a brand new trial on Court TV. Sarah Collucci was found dead with a garden hose wrapped around her neck. Her husband's been charged with murder, but he says his wife died either by suicide or by accident. Plus, we'll take you inside the Kevin Spacey case as the defense makes accusations against the accuser.
Closing arguments with Vinnie Politan. Tonight, starting at 6/5 Central on the all-new Court TV.
Michael didn't do nothing to Sarah. He was innocent. He's still innocent. He's gonna go to his grave innocent.
This is just not an easy case. At first, it was just a suicide.
What makes you say she tried to kill herself?
She put herself around a hose or something. I don't know.
I was told that she had hung herself, and I immediately was like, he did it. No question.
Authorities have arrested Michael Collucci, charging him with the murder of his wife.
Once the actual murder charge was there, Michael Collucci hired Andy Savage, probably the most well-known lawyer in the Low Country.
That's how she died. She hung herself. Now, you know, whether it's suicide or accidental, who knows?
Michael Collucci is the most evil person I've ever known.
When I came up and I observed the body laying on that concrete pad down there.
There's no way she would go into a dirty alley and put a garden hose around her neck.
He murdered our daughter.
The evidence just isn't there.
This is not a slam dunk trial.
He don't need to explain himself. He didn't do nothing. You gotta accept that.
He killed her. I know he killed her.
We may never know exactly what happened that night that ended in Sarah's death.
Welcome back to Court TV Live and our gavel-to-gavel coverage of South Carolina versus Michael Collucci. I'm Seema Iyer. Michael and Sarah Collucci were married back in 2012. It was a second marriage for both of them, and they each had a young daughter they brought to this blended family. Now, by all appearances, Sarah and Michael seemed happy. However, after her death, investigators discovered Sarah had serious alcohol issues and a deeply troubled marriage. And now her husband, Michael Collucci, he's facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison if he's convicted of her murder. Let's bring in Colonel Adam Lee with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office and crime and justice reporter Ted Rowlands. Ted, I want to begin with you because the witness on the stand now is David Owen, Special Agent, South Carolina Law Enforcement Department. And you were explaining to me that he wasn't initially on the case.
Yeah, he's in charge. He's the lead investigator now, but he wasn't there the first weeks of this case. So what you're seeing is Savage taking advantage of that fact. I mean, he's asking him questions that he knows he doesn't know the answer to about that night, and then he comes back and says, "Well, you are the lead investigator, are you not?"
Right.
And
good accent,
it's
Ted.
very
like it.
It's very compelling, and it's making him look as though he doesn't know what he's doing. But in a way that it is sort of folksy.
Very folksy, a lot of Southern charm from the attorney. But just to be clear, so the investigation started with the first witness, Williams Brooks William Brooks All, and he was an officer. He's an officer at Moncks Corner Police Department. So is that how it switched?
Yeah, so he's a responding officer. He gets the call, and so he's the one that was first on scene. And
So he's like the local.
Yeah, but then you saw Savage asking him questions outside his area of expertise as well as a tactic, also to make him look as though he's unqualified. I mean, clearly the defense theory here is that this was not investigated properly.
How is it working so far, Colonel?
I don't think it's working very well. Whenever you transfer responsibility of an investigation from one investigator to another, you lose the integrity of the investigation. I think that happened with the O.J. Simpson trial. The first investigator that was investigating that murder was not the person who ended up with the investigation. And if you know about that trial, they lost a lot of information in that transfer of power.
Well, you know who knows about the trial? Ted Rollins here knows about the trial. Do you agree with that?
I agree absolutely that anytime there's a change, because the people that are there right away and processing the crime scene, dealing with it, there's usually a reason why there's a change too. So, and who knows the political reasons, the feelings behind it. It's when, the old days was horrible, when two agencies are working together. Nothing really is as smooth as it should be. And a good defense attorney can take advantage of it.
But it is a legitimate reason that it's handled by a local. Okay,
Yeah,
but do you see the parallels between this investigation or just this idea that an integrity of the investigation is lost when it changes hands?
Absolutely, yeah, and there's no way around it, right? I mean, there's no way around. If you are going to transfer anything in this manner with so much complexity, you're not going to be able to fill in the next person coming in to the point that they should be. Reading about something, reading documents, reading reports, far different than being at a crime scene, being at an autopsy. They're just two different things.
Right, and I believe that before we were talking about that it was reported that at the crime scene, Michael Collucci had a bloody lip, but there was some inconsistency about when this came forward. Let's listen to a bit of sound from Deputy Sheriff Kimbrough, and he's from the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office testifying. We saw him in court earlier today.
Did you discuss with anybody else the observations of this blood you saw on the lips?
To my knowledge, to my best of my memory, sir, I don't remember if I did or if I didn't.
So it struck you as being significant, but not significant enough to tell anybody about?
That would be a fair statement, yes, sir.
Okay, so was this something that was missing from a police report? Nobody knew about it until later?
No, it was there. It's just the point he was making is that he didn't make a big deal out of it then, so why should the jury make a big deal out of it now, is what he's trying to do.
Okay. So in the break, Colonel, you said you have a theory.
Yes, I do.
What's your theory?
I believe, based on what I've read in the pathologist's report, there was a comment there that said that there was an inverted V shape around the neck, which was consistent with a hanging as opposed to a strangling. And I don't know if the prosecutor has possibly painted themselves into a corner with the theory that there's a hands around the throat situation. And if you think about it, if you put into a chokehold, that's a V around the neck. So possibly she was choked from the back. If he was behind her, that would sort of explain the knees.
Right.
She's on her hands and knees, and he's behind her with his arm, with her neck in his arm like that, in that V shape.
In that crutch.
She would not have any abrasions on the back of her neck.
Okay, so just to be clear, it is reported that there were obvious signs of trauma on her body, a bruise on her eye, scrapes to her knees, an abrasion to her elbow, dirt on her hands and feet, and a shoe slipped off her foot. But okay, in your scenario, how do you explain, they're saying there are ligature marks or compression. So
the only way that scenario works is if he's in that hold and her necklace.
That's right, the necklace
into her neck. That would work potentially.
Because that's what they're saying. They're saying that the marks are not consistent with a garden hose, but are consistent with the necklace that she was wearing making an impression.
Right. That's what the prosecution theory might be there.
But there, okay, but you're saying chokehold, but there's nothing. There's no way that she was hung on that fence.
Well, the autopsy does show that there isn't a complete circle. So this V is consistent with a hanging because you're only getting the front of the neck and not the back of the neck, which someone's hands right around the neck would sort of close the circle, if not all the way closer. But your theory also would fit into that category.
Okay, but so if it was hanging, she would almost have been stuck in that loop, is what you're saying.
She wouldn't be in a loop, she'd be in a V.
She would be in a V.
The back of her neck, right?
Right, exactly. So then the marks wouldn't go all the way back.
Right.
Okay, we actually have some sound, and this is from David Owen, who is still on the stand, or actually just got off the stand, but this was from earlier and talking exactly about the hose and how it looped.
How much DNA did they recover from the crime scene?
When I returned back in April, no DNA was recovered.
How much blood, how much body fluids were recovered from the crime scene?
When I went back in April, I didn't recover any.
Because?
It had been 11 months.
And in that 11 months, what happens?
Weather elements.
Change the crime scene.
The weather elements, yes.
Well, you made measurements of the loops and said it was only 7 inches, so it's impossible for somebody to stick their head in that.
I
That's
did
a false.
I did not take those measurements.
But somebody from SLED did under your authority.
Somebody from Berkeley County took those prior to my involvement.
And you know now that's a very misleading statement.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that was the explanation of the hose being looped. And Colonel, you wanted to add to your theory, just letting you know that Mr. Collucci also had marks on him, like we talked about. His lip was bleeding, his arms and the back of his hand had scrapes. And how does your theory play into that?
I believe it's possible he was on her back. She's face down, he's face down. He's on her back with his in a chokehold type of position, and that could explain any type of abrasions to his elbow or arm, which would have been touching the ground if he was on top of her from the back.
And her resistance with her head might explain the lip.
So she would not be able to reach back and have those defensive marks that they say are consistent with someone trying to get someone from around your throat. If you were being choked, you would naturally probably scratch yourself.
Okay, but I just want to point out one thing, because the hose still is a factor. A hair of hers was found, so we heard that clip about DNA. A hair of hers, her DNA, hair on the hose, and her DNA is on the hose.
Yeah, but
they believe, the prosecution believes, that he staged that scene after she was killed. That's what they believe.
Okay, so that would be consistent then.
Absolutely. It depends on which way you're looking at this.
This really is. This is like a real murder mystery. This really is, and a tragedy, of course. Thank you both. Stick with me, and we will go back to South Carolina after this break. And now you can get your Court TV anywhere you want it. Just go on your laptop or mobile device. Go to CourtTV.com. It's now streaming on Google Play, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You'll get the latest coverage of our current trials and also watch some of the most compelling trials of all time. Just go to our Trials on Demand section. Be right back. Welcome back to Court TV Live. On the day Sarah Collucci died, she and her husband, Michael Collucci, they'd been drinking. They went to the Gold Standard so Sarah could use the bathroom. Michael Collucci later told police he waited in the car, made some phone calls. Now, by the time he noticed something was wrong, he found her body hanging with a garden hose wrapped around her neck. But he also told several other versions of that story. The prosecutor has just called the owner of the building that housed the Gold Standard to the stand. So let's take you back inside the courtroom right now.
State your full name for the record and spell your last name, please.
Alpha T. Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y.
How old are you, Mr. Bailey?
78.
And are you currently employed?
No, I'm retired.
Where were you employed?
I own my own business, Bailey Specialties, Inc.
Okay. Do you know the defendant, Michael Collucci?
Yes, I do.
How do you know him?
He approached me in 2012 about leasing some frontage space in a warehouse.
And where was that located?
Formerly known as the old L&M Grocery.
All right. Do you still own that property?
Yes, I do.
Did you own it at the time of the incident in question?
Yes, I did.
What changes have taken place to the property since then, from then till now?
Since 2012?
Since 2015.
2015. Very little has changed since 2015. They widened the highway a little bit, so they have an encroachment into some of the property now, the front of it.
But to your property, what changes have taken place to?
What changes have taken place? Virtually none.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? What am I showing you?
You're showing me a aerial view of the property.
And what property is this?
This is the old L&M grocery store, the warehouse, and the surrounding enclosed property.
All right. It's time I'd like to publish to the jury, Your Honor. Also wish to move this into evidence if it is.
Tell us which.
State's Exhibit 1, Your Honor.
It's already been in.
Okay. All right. So what does this property at 2206 North Main Street actually consist of?
It consists of the old grocery store, a residence, all under one roof, and a warehouse. Then it has some sheds built along the back of it for storage space.
Okay, so what is this, if you want to look behind you? What is this portion right here?
That's the old L&M grocery, the storefront.
And what was it when Michael Collucci owned it, or leased it?
He used it as called the gold standard.
Okay, and what's the this big area behind it?
That's the warehouse.
Okay, and what is this right here? Sorry.
That's a fenced-in area separating the warehouse property from the storage yard.
Okay, and does that fence have a gate?
That's a gate, yes.
Okay. When on the week leading up to the incident in question on May 20th, 2015, did you have to do any yard work or maintenance on the property?
Yeah, I'm always up there killing fire ants, weeding the property, mowing the lawn. I had access to that property. The entire property was not leased to Collucci, just the warehouse and the front part.
Okay. What do you remember being up there the day before?
I cannot recall whether it was the day before, but it would have been within that same time frame. I was almost up there every day.
Do you remember any specific tasks you had to do when you were there?
If anything, I would have been weed eating around the yard and killing the weeds that grew up in the asphalt.
Did you ever clean up a burn barrel?
Yes, I did.
And what did you find around the burn barrel?
Just burnt materials, household goods, garbage, liquor bottles, beer cans.
Do you remember what kind of liquor bottles?
If my memory serves me straight, it was Crown Royal.
On May 20th, 2015, did you go to the scene?
Yes, I did.
Why did you go to the scene?
I was at home and I received a phone call and they asked me, what's going on at your property? I said, I have no earthly idea. They said, well, there's a bunch of police cars up there. So I got in my vehicle. I only lived 2 blocks away and I drove down there.
All right, what time was it when you left?
Approximately 7 p.m., 6:45, somewhere in that time frame.
Do you remember what the weather was like that day?
Overcast.
Okay. Was it still light outside?
Yeah, it was still light. Yeah, it was visible. You could see.
Okay. Was the crime scene already taped off?
Yes, it was.
Where did you go to stand when you got there? If you want to point up there.
When I arrived, there was that driveway to the right, and along the front of the store here was full of vehicles. So I had to park over here under this tree.
Okay. And so, were you able to view the crime scene?
Yes.
Where were you standing about?
I walked around the front of the building and walked along the sidewalk down the driveway. But I couldn't go any farther than that white shed because they had crime scene tape across there. I was able to view a portion of it from there, and there's a walkway across that ditch. So I was able to go down and stand on my property on that side and look across the ditch.
Is this the ditch? Is this the ditch you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, so you're standing right on the other side of this ditch, about
right
here?
There, right about there.
And what did you see from there?
The only thing I could see from that vantage point was the back entrance to the warehouse. There's a walk-through door, and there was a towel or a cloth or something covering up something.
Okay. And were you able to see a hose?
Yes, I did.
Where was the hose?
The hose was right next to the building, behind that gate where it attaches to the warehouse. There was a hose bib there.
Okay, and did you see any part of the hose that wasn't on the bib?
Well, I couldn't tell because whatever was there was covered up at the time.
Okay, did you see a hose on top of the fence?
Yes, no, not on top of the fence. I saw it wrapped around the top of the fence and around the hose bib.
Okay, so you saw it wrapped around the top of the fence?
Yes.
Okay, and you were standing here?
Right there, yes.
And you could clearly see the hose?
Yes.
Did you see a vehicle that was parked in the driveway?
Yes, I did.
What kind of vehicle was it?
To the best of my recollection, it was a Mercedes.
Okay, what color was it?
Beige in color, if I'm not mistaken.
All right, and where about was that parked?
Right in front of the gate, right there.
Right there?
It was parked right about where your pin's pointing, right there.
Okay. So how far away from the car would you say you were?
Well, I had to almost walk past the car. I couldn't get to it, about 15 feet from the car.
And the car was closer to the hose than you were?
Yes.
And you could clearly see the hose from where you were standing?
Yes, I could.
Had you ever seen the hose wrapped around the top of the fence like that before?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll take you back to court after this short break. This is Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
I'm Julie Grant. As a lawyer, I'm an officer of the court. As a prosecutor, I represented the people. Now, on Court TV, I represent you.
You have to look at everything in this case.
Because it's my job to bring you the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
The all-new Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Welcome back to our gavel-to-gavel coverage of South Carolina versus Michael Collucci. Sarah Collucci died behind the Gold Standard, the jewelry store that she and her husband operated. Michael Collucci says she hung herself with a hose, but prosecutors say Michael Collucci strangled her after a day of drinking and drugs. Let's take you back inside the courtroom for more cross-examination of Alpha Bailey, the man who owned the Gold Standard building.
Afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
You were kind enough to bring me out to the property you own.
Yes, sir.
Actually, you own a lot of property in that area.
Well, that one parcel consists of about 7.5 acres.
And that property's been under sale or attempted to sell?
It has been on the market since 2014.
Did I see you wearing glasses earlier?
Yes, sir.
Back on the 15th, 2015, did you have a prescription at that time?
Yes, sir. I had a prescription then.
And were you wearing your glasses that day?
Yes, sir, I was.
And you had an opportunity you got a phone call from the Collucci, Mrs. Collucci's father or mother. Is that why you went?
Did I do what now?
You got a phone call from Mrs. Collucci's mother or father to go find out what was going on?
No, sir.
Who called you?
The phone call was from a Mr. Michael Moore. And Mr. Michael Moore rents part of that building for a driving school. Now, not Mr. Moore that you know of.
Oh, it's a different Moore.
This is a different Moore.
My apologies.
That's quite all right.
Could we put back up States 1, please?
Right next to Andy.
Pardon me?
It's right next to you.
You must think I know what I'm doing. I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey. You're free to turn around, look at what, you know, whatever you need to do to testify is fine with me. Now, who took this picture?
I do not know who took that picture. It's an aerial view of the property, but I don't know who produced it or who took it.
And what's the date that it was taken?
I would say it's probably prior to 2015. The highway's already been widened one time, but it has not been widened the second time because that tree is now gone, and the sidewalk is almost up to close to the building.
So this photograph, does this represent what the your property looked like in May of 2015?
Yes, sir, I would say it is.
The roads has changed. If we could look at the property, let me see if I have something.
Okay, Savage is trying to get a lay of the land there, literally asking the witness, Alpha Bailey, the property owner of the Gold Standard. That's the business owned by the Colluccis that was housed in that building, the crime scene in essence. And he's looking at the photograph, trying to figure out where was when, what.
I'm going to try to use this laser thing. This is what highway?
That's Highway 17A or North Main Street.
And at the time this is family property, correct?
Yes, it is.
And back when you were young, sir, this was a two-lane?
That was a two-lane road, yes, sir.
And when did they add these extra lanes? About?
That was done right around 2011 or 12.
All right. And at that time, that was before they widened it even further?
Yes, sir. It's widened farther now.
So between 2012 and today, it's considerably changed in terms of the highway.
Yes, 17,
sir. Correct?
Yes, it's changed.
Was this a sidewalk here back when this photograph?
The sidewalk is right along there. Yeah, that's sidewalk.
That sidewalk's no longer there, correct?
Yeah, it's there.
Well,
it's just moved over.
That sidewalk is no longer there.
That sidewalk is still there.
Well, this sidewalk.
Oh, this sidewalk here, it's no longer there.
Right.
Right, it's gone.
So there's a new sidewalk.
Yeah, right.
And that cuts right along
the edge of the building.
And over here where this black car is, that's changed pretty dramatically as well.
Yes, sir. You used to be able to turn into the property from 17A going north. They have a concrete barrier now, and you can no longer.
Down here where I-26 is, you'd come up and you could turn right in. And since this situation developed, you no longer can make a left-hand turn.
You can't turn left anymore.
Gotta go all the way up and around. Now, you see this arrow right here?
Yes, sir.
Does that exist today?
Is what?
Does it exist today? Is that same little arrow there?
No, that does not exist today.
And back in 2015, May of 2015, did that arrow exist?
I think that arrow is still there in 2015.
Because you could come towards Somerville down here,
right.
Monk's Corner up here, and you would turn left right in front of that driveway to go down a road.
Right.
And that road's name was what?
That road used to go down Myers Road. That was where the intersection was.
And
It's now moved.
Yeah, the highway department has changed all this area. This used to be a T-bone right here where people who were stopped at the stop sign here would be looking directly across. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And the vision from over here at the stop sign, they could see right back here.
Right.
Particularly in this area right here.
If I'm not mistaken, you're looking at this turn hour down here, and you've got a break in the medium right there. That road is actually came out directly in front of the store when it T-boned into there before.
You can, there are photographs. I assume that the Attorney General, the prosecutors have shown you photographs of the current composition and the old composition?
The old composition where that road used to come out directly in front of the grocery store, that road has now moved so it comes out
this way
in front of the property up here.
And there's a stoplight up there.
Right.
So the traffic that's coming from Monk's Corner, the increase in traffic required the highway department to double the number of lanes.
Yes.
And then within 2 years, the traffic on 17, the highway department decided they were going to have to take even more property, put a median in, get closer to your building.
Correct.
Now, in 2012, when they put the second lane in, did they talk to you about that?
Yes, sir.
And did they condemn any of your property?
It was the highway department already had drawings for widening that highway even more. It had not been widened yet. They made me an offer at the time, which I did not take.
Because you thought they were, as many people do, a little cheap on
right, a little bit cheap
property. But that was in 2012.
Right.
You got that resolved.
Yes, sir. That happened in August of 2015. Right. We got that resolved. They actually condemned the property, put up a bond and condemned the property.
And was that for the first improvement of the highway or the second?
That was the second improvement to the highway.
And that condemnation included this corner of your building right in this area?
Yes, it does.
And at that time, this corner right here was called the Gold Exchange.
Yes, sir. It was the gold standard. Well,
it was not a jewelry store. It's where people would take gold and have it weighed and be given cash. Is that correct?
In May of 2012 is when I signed a lease with Mr. Collucci. So after May 2012, that was known as the gold standard, where they would buy gold.
Yes, they being the Collucci's.
Yes.
So they weren't selling earrings or?
No, sir. It was not a jewelry store across the counter. It was only for buying gold.
Yeah, people.
To my understanding.
People would bring their whatever and need money, and he would weigh it or she would weigh it or whoever they would weigh it, and then give them cash.
Right.
This area back in here, is that what you call the warehouse? That
was the warehouse, yes, sir.
And was there any jewelry business going on in here?
Only storage in there for the, I also rented him that warehouse.
But there was nothing, shall we say, something somebody would want to rob. I mean, that's a target store.
To my knowledge, there was no manufacturing or anything concerning with gold going on in that warehouse.
Pretty messy place. I guess when you were in there, you saw it wasn't well organized.
Well, that progressed. Only later was it used for a lot of storage for household goods.
Now, this driveway here, what's the width of that driveway?
Approximately 8.5 feet.
So if a car was here, could somebody drive around it to get back in here?
That was generally one way. You drove in and turned around and drove back out.
Okay, so pretty narrow and confined. Now, this fence here looks like it has a gate on it.
Yes, it does. That's a gate.
And is that gate maintained with a lock?
Yes, it is.
And it looks like there's a fence here along the side and maybe across.
There's a fence going all the way down that ditch, and right in front of that little right square, there's another fence that runs across there.
Is that it? Well, let's see how this works.
That little
here.
white shed, there's a fence, yeah.
Okay. Right here?
That's a fenced-in storage area. It used to be for propane storage back when it was L&M Grocery.
All right.
In front of that little building, the little white square on the right, there's a fence that runs all the way along there.
The fence is where the body was found. The fence, it's the crime scene. More of the cross-examination after this short break. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Seema Iyer. We are covering South Carolina versus Michael Collucci. Now, he's a jewelry businessman accused of strangling his wife, Sarah. Michael Collucci says his wife committed suicide. The couple appeared to be running a successful jewelry business in Charleston before Sarah died. The Collucci's business landlord has been on the stand testifying about the property. Alpha Bailey said he was notified that something happened there that day. Sarah Collucci died, so he drove to the scene. Let's take you back inside the courtroom for the continued testimony.
Now, let's look at the rest of the property. So this is the gold exchange right here. What is this?
No, the portion in the center is the gold exchange.
Right here?
No, right to the left a little bit, right there. That's the gold standard.
Okay.
That portion to the right are bathrooms.
All right.
There's bathrooms there. And the portion to the left is Mr. Mike's driving school.
All right, that's a driving school.
That's the driving school.
And these bathrooms, there are two of them there, correct?
Right.
Are they accessible to who?
Only to Mr. Mike's driving school, and used to be, I don't think the Collucci's ever had access to the bathroom because they had their own bathroom in the building.
Yes.
So Mr. Mike's driving school would have been.
And back in this building, there was a rest facility.
Inside this building right here, the little black darker square.
Here?
Yeah, right back there in the middle of that is where the bathrooms are for the inside.
Okay, and the entry to the warehouse would be right about here?
Yeah, that's the walk-through door.
Beyond the fence?
Right, beyond the fence.
Now, back here, these look like, from the air, they look like structures. What are these?
That's storage sheds. They're open storage sheds, open to one side, to the warehouse side. They're metal on the back and metal on the top.
And this property, the fence, is it fenced in back up here?
Yeah, that entire property is fenced in.
And back here is what? What's back in this area?
If you will look directly behind the warehouse, you can barely see the front corner of a starting of another shed. That goes back across and back down here. So those sheds are U-shaped.
So there's I'm putting this thing outside the picture, but
that's all right. There's sheds back there. Now there is also a gate back there, a double opening gate.
Back in this area?
Right where you're pointing, right?
So you could access this portion of the property by this gate by coming through a gate back here.
Correct.
So if somebody was driving their vehicle, they could go down whatever road, wherever it is, and come in the back gate.
Well, they'd have to access it from my property because that gate came out on my property.
Right, but it's accessible to get in here.
Right.
Now, what is this right here?
I cannot readily identify that object because I don't know who took the picture.
I got you. Did you boat?
No, I do not boat.
So you couldn't identify that as a boat?
If you suggested what it was, I could say it is, but I have no earthly idea.
The judge will take me and put me someplace else if I suggest something to you.
Right. So that would be speculation on my part, so I don't know.
Did you on occasion in the 2015 spring time range see boats in or about here?
Yes, sir.
Red boat?
A red boat.
White boat?
I think it was a red boat that Mr. Collucci had brought onto the property.
And how about the guy, Philip?
Yes, sir.
He was sort of, I don't know what he was. Was he a maintenance tech? Should have been a maintenance guy.
I was introduced to him as a handyman.
And he would supposedly clean up around and do that sort of stuff. You ever see him cleaning boats?
I personally have never witnessed him cleaning a boat.
Are you aware that he used to clean boats and vehicles back in this area?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
And are you aware that the hose that was back in this area actually started way in the front of your property, maybe around this area?
Yes, sir. At the front corner of this building down here is a hose bib. And that's the only access.
Right about there?
Right there. Mm-hmm.
And
that's the only access to water on that side of the building.
All right. So if somebody wanted to use water back in this area, this would be the bib that they would turn the hose on.
Yes, sir.
And you know one thing, Mr. Bailey, wasn't there an air conditioning unit right around in here?
Actually, there's 3 air conditioning units right beside the building back there.
Is it in this
photo? Right directly behind the building here, there are 2 units, and inside that first fencing area, there's another unit.
All right. The question I guess I asked is, can we see the air conditioning units in here?
Right where you were just pointing, to the left, right up beside the building, right there are 2 units.
Right. Do you see
they
them?
They serve heating and cooling. They serve the L&M grocery and the kitchen area.
And L&M Grocery closed some number of years ago, and the kitchen closed some number of years ago.
Right.
Is that correct? And you cannot, unless I'm looking at the wrong thing, I can't see the air conditioner.
No, you can't see them from there.
From this photograph?
No, not from this photograph.
That was taken by somebody you don't know?
I do not know.
At a date and time you don't know?
Don't know who took that photograph. Or the time frame.
Don't know the photograph or the time frame. Okay, you just heard from Alpha Bailey, the property owner where the Gold Standard Jewelry store was housed. So much to discuss with this trial so far. Let's bring in Court TV's Vinnie Politan and criminal defense attorney Jasmine Barber. Thank you both for being here. So this trial has taken a really strong start. The defense attorney seems to be putting out the defense through cross-examinations of such early witnesses.
Every question he asks sounds like he knows something and he's just laying a trap for every one of them. And he may not be for each one, but that's just the way it sounds. He is so good, so experienced, and so comfortable, and I just feel like he is a step ahead of everyone here.
Including me, definitely including me. Jasmine, what do you think?
I definitely agree with Vinnie at this point. It seems like he is just giving them a little bit of hose to hang themselves with.
Oh, Jasmine, ooh, brutal. Okay, but you know what? You're on the right track because we want to do a deep dive into this hose issue. We have some magnificent graphics that explain the different theories of the manner of death, because the cause of death is not at issue here, okay? So the cause of death, so we're gonna look at the cause of death is asphyxiation, but it is the manner. So on one side you have, was it a hanging? The bruising is limited to the front area, ligature mark is high and at an upward angle. And that is what the defense is going to say. Now, strangulation, that is what the prosecution, their theory, the bruising circles the entire neck and ligature mark is low and horizontal. So those are the things that you need. Now, just to kind of set this up and then you guys tell me what you think, the pathologist in this case is basically saying the hose didn't cause the death. And she opined that the hose was too stiff and non-pliable, and it must have been a ligature that scarred Sarah's neck. And the ligature would be more consistent with something pressing down on the necklace. She was wearing a necklace. So that would be something consistent. And then there is that issue of whether it went around the neck and the marks as such. So, Vinnie, so far, what are your thoughts on how the manner of death could have occurred? What's consistent with the evidence you've seen so far?
Well, the thing about this case is it's a hose, and that is something that most everyone is familiar with, right? You've had hoses, you know how they are, and you know, on first impression, just common sense, it doesn't sound right that you could hang yourself with a hose.
Why?
It just doesn't sound right. Now, they may have an expert that can explain it to me,
right,
but I think that is an uphill climb to try to win that argument that it was a hose, because common sense just it doesn't play that way.
Jasmine, what do you think so far? If the defense is going with that version, what's more likely, suicide or accident? And you know, what do you see as the manner?
I think that the defense attorney, Mr. Savage, tried to lay the foundation pretty early when he was discussing about if she had fallen forward, could the hose have tightened around her neck? But I think that it's still kind of up in the air whether he's going to nail himself down to whether it was an accident or whether it was a suicide. But personally, I think that the evidence is leaning more towards an accident at this point.
Really? Okay, now, as opposed to a purposeful strangulation.
Or even a hanging. I find it fascinating that, you know, anybody would attempt to hang themselves from a 6-foot fence.
Yeah.
But when you look at the facts where, you know, she was drunk, she was in high heels, and she's trekking through the dirt, I personally think that she could have tripped and fallen into this hose.
That's a good point. Okay, so let me just bring these other facts out to you and see what you think. So there was other signs of struggle at this scene. There was a broken fingernail in the car, broken sunglasses, a cracked phone screen. Of course, we don't know how long she had that cracked phone screen. And on her body, she had a bruise on her eye, scrapes to her knee, an abrasion to her elbow, dirt on her hands and feet, and a shoe slipped off her foot. What are those signs consistent with?
I think that it's still possibly consistent with an accident. She's struggling to breathe. She's fighting for her life. She can break a fingernail trying to get the hose from around her neck. The shoe can fall off. I mean, to me, I just don't think, from the evidence I've heard so far, that the state is meeting their burden that this was a murder.
Okay.
That sounds like a stretch to me personally.
Okay.
And again, I'm a former prosecutor. I see the world that way. But to me, I come back to common sense, and common sense tells me there's bruising, there's dirt, there's a lost foot, there's a fingernail in the car, there is some sort of struggle, the broken glasses, all of it. I mean, to me, it's too many things that would be coincidental to happen or happen beforehand and just happen to be there. It looks like a struggle, and I again, telling me that someone hung themselves with a garden hose. Have you ever tried to bend a garden hose?
No, you know I don't have a garden. I
Okay.
barely
Well,
I don't even have a home.
A
I
lot of folks in South Carolina have gardens.
Okay, all right. We are going to explore this further. Jasmine, Vinny, thank you so much. More Court TV Live at the top of the hour.
Tonight on Court TV.
Opening statements in a brand new trial on Court TV. Sarah Collucci was found dead with a garden hose wrapped around her neck. Her husband's been charged with murder, but he says his wife died either by suicide or by accident. Plus, we'll take you inside the Kevin Spacey case as the defense makes accusations against the accuser.
Closing arguments with Vinny Politan. Tonight, starting at 6/5 Central on the all-new Court TV.
Welcome to Court TV Live and our gavel-to-gavel coverage of South Carolina versus Michael Collucci. And this is a case which could be the plot of a Southern Gothic novel. That's right. Michael Collucci, a prominent jeweler near Charleston, South Carolina, is accused of killing his wife, Sarah. Police say he used a garden hose to strangle her to death, but he says he didn't do it, that somehow she accidentally hung herself with that garden hose. Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter takes a closer look at the facts of this case.
911, hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello. My wife is not well. She's trying to kill herself.
Somebody's got what?
2209. I'm trying to give her CPR right now.
What happened?
I think she's trying to kill herself.
It's 7:12 p.m. the evening of May 20th, 2015. Just a few hours earlier, Michael Collucci was enjoying drinks with his wife. Now he is calling 911, telling the operator she hung herself.
What makes you say she tried to kill herself?
She's trying to put, can you come on, please?
She what?
She put herself around a hose or something. I don't know. She can't please.
The hose Collucci is referring to looped around this fence. Collucci and his wife Sarah Lynn had stopped here, the Gold Standard, where they ran a gold trading business together. Sarah Lynn needed to use the bathroom. Collucci said he waited in the car just 20 feet away, but by the time he realized something was wrong, the damage was done. First responders said they were at the scene within minutes after getting Collucci's call, but Sarah Lynn was too far gone to attempt life-saving measures.
She was blue around the lips, blue to purple, somewhat cold to the touch.
Alpha Bailey is the owner of the property the Collucci's rented.
When I came up and I observed the body laying on that concrete pad down there, which is in front of the warehouse door, but it was locked.
Bailey is referring to this area of the fenced-in yard that he owns. Police questioned how she got there. The gate was closed, so that would have meant Sarah Lynn would have had to squeeze through this 8-inch gap.
I can't get through there.
Bailey can't make it through, but Collucci maintains his wife squeezed through the gap routinely. There were signs that troubled investigators: a bruise on Sarah Lynn's eye, scrapes on her knees, what looked like a struggle in their car, a loose fingernail, broken sunglasses, and a cracked phone. Collucci too bore signs of trauma: a busted lip, scrapes on his hands and arm.
At first, it was just she had died. There wasn't allegations of a murder at that point. But then the story comes out that there may be some inconsistencies there in the story and that this may be a murder.
It took nearly a year before investigators accused Michael Collucci of killing his wife. Sarah Lynn's parents were suspicious long before the charge was filed.
And Michael told me that Sarah was dead. I noticed that he wasn't crying. That was the first that came to my mind, after, when I was sitting there. He wasn't even crying. What happened? And he told me that she hung herself. And I just dropped the phone.
Barbara and Ronald Moore knew Sarah Lynn was troubled. She was drinking and abusing drugs, and May 20th had a special meaning to the victim. 8 years earlier, Michael Vieira, Sarah's former husband, died. Sarah and Michael Vieira had a daughter, Bishop. She was only 3 when his untimely death devastated the family. But Sarah's parents insist this would not have driven Sarah to kill herself.
See, Bishop's father, she didn't have a living father. I understand that she was drinking. I understand they were doing drugs, but as far as to leave that baby by herself with nobody, no, that wouldn't have happened.
It was a freak accident. That's all it was.
Stefan Collucci is Michael's brother. The two share not just a name, but an interest in the family business that started decades ago with their father.
At Collucci's Jewelers, family is always very important to us.
This is Michael in a 2007 commercial for Collucci Jewelers, his parents in the background. Stefan says he and Michael were rival business owners. They operated separate stores under the Collucci name. But for Michael, business always came second to family.
Sarah was a great girl, yeah. Michael worshipped the ground she walked on. All this other kind of stuff that's going on is nonsense. Michael loved that woman.
A Southern murder mystery indeed. Let's bring in crime and justice reporter Ted Rowlands and criminal defense attorney Jasmine Barber. Ted, to you first. Can you just expound a little on the relationship between Sarah and Michael Collucci and tell us what you've investigated and you're reporting?
From the outside, looks great. There was a blended family. They each brought a daughter into their relationship. They lived happily in this community just north of Charleston, about 30 miles outside of Charleston, but we're part of the greater Charleston community. Owned a business, again, on the outside looked great, on the inside, major trouble.
And they both worked in this business. They both ran the business together.
Right, which is a family-owned, been around for decades, successful-ish. Their finances were a disaster, apparently, and the drug and alcohol issue was prevalent in their relationship, and the fighting was prevalent. You'll see in the pretrial documents, there are text messages, there is real discord within this relationship that on the outside, and I think they went to great lengths to make it appear on the outside that everything was fine.
But I think that's a Southern thing, right, Jasmine? That sometimes it's just, the appearances are everything, and that's how a lot of couples down south behave sometimes, just to protect their children and their families and the public.
As you always hear, you've got to fake it till you make it. And so you want to keep up those appearances. You don't want to seem tumultuous from the outside, especially when, troubled things are going on internally.
And there's one very disturbing part of Sarah's past, and that's her ex-husband.
Yeah.
Or her late husband, not ex.
Late husband,
Late
right. He died tragically, and the manner of death was, they believe it was self-inflicted. He was stabbed 20 times, though. So, I mean, a lot of eyebrows are raised when you read about it. He was somehow stabbed himself 20 times under the influence of multiple drugs at the time. And this was something that rocked her and her family. She visited his grave routinely. Her death coincided with the anniversary of their marriage and within days of his death.
Okay, right,
And
because
it was a reoccurring theme within her life. Absolutely.
So it was, right, because, okay, so 8 years earlier on May 18th, and then I think May 20th is the day that was the anniversary of her the anniversary of the marriage.
Right.
And May 18th was the death. And, right, so...
and she was depressed. People said was depressed about this. This was one of those, people that had a lasting impression on her life, and she never really got over it, despite her marriage to Michael.
And it stabbed more than 20 times, and 5 knife wounds that penetrated. And he had in his system cocaine, marijuana, LSD. When she died, 3 times the alcohol limit of the state of South Carolina, plus I believe it was cocaine.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So we're going to take a look back at the prosecution's opening statement. But Jasmine, fresh slate, what would you say, before even looking at this, what would you have thought and expected the prosecution to lay out in their opening statement?
Well, I think that traditionally prosecutors like to start out with a little explanation, a little preview of what the law is and what these facts need to be tied to. So in the case of South Carolina, I believe the law requires malice aforethought. So the prosecution is going to have to lay out an intent to kill, and the fact that he, at least, even if it was in the spur of the moment, had sufficient consideration in order to form that intent to kill. So as a prosecutor, that's what I would be focused on.
And would you also expect to hear about who's going to testify and kind of give a roadmap, right?
I absolutely would foreshadow the witnesses that I'm going to bring. That's the entire purpose of an opening statement, is to say, I expect the evidence will show. This is what you will see. And then you want to, throughout the trial, make sure you are keeping those promises.
Right. Okay, well, let's see if you are correct, my friend. Let's see. Okay, so right now we are going to go back into the courtroom and watch the opening statements by the prosecution.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask that you give counsel your undivided attention. You may proceed.
Please, court.
Yes, sir.
The call to 911 claims she hung herself with a garden hose from a 6-foot chain link fence in daylight, less than 25 feet from the defendant. But when EMTs showed up a few minutes later, her extremities were cold and her face was blue. Good morning. My name is Joel Kozak, and along with Megan Birchstead, we represent the state of South Carolina in its case against the defendant, Michael Collucci. Mr. Collucci stands before you today charged with a crime. And it is our job to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that he is in fact guilty of that crime, and that is the crime of murder. Now, at the end of this trial, the judge is going to instruct you in the law, but I'd like to take a moment just to introduce it right now. Murder is intentionally causing the death of someone with malice aforethought. And you're going to hear that malice is simply actions that are willful, purposeful, and without justification, and that he knew what he was going to do. That is our burden throughout this case. Now, to meet that burden, we're going to call several witnesses to the stand. And what you'll learn is that the defendant and Sarah, they like to keep up appearances, even though they weren't doing that well financially. You're going to hear that when Sarah drinks, she likes to pick fights. She doesn't pick fights with anyone. She likes to pick fights with the defendant. She'll say whatever she needs to say to get a reaction from him. You're going to hear from EMTs, law enforcement, and first responders who all arrived at the scene that day. They're going to explain how when they got to the scene, something just seemed off, and the details just didn't add up. You're going to hear from the forensic pathologist, Dr. Tormos, who performed the autopsy on Sarah. She's going to explain to you how she performed that autopsy and that she did not report a manner of death, leaving it undetermined. Then you're going to hear from an expert who's going to explain that Sarah's death definitely, or manner of death definitely wasn't unknown. Also, it wasn't a hanging. You're also going to hear from numerous witnesses that the defendant told multiple stories to, and none of those stories seem to be the same. Now, the defense doesn't have a burden in this case. They don't have to prove anything. They don't have to call any witnesses. But if they do, you get to ask yourself if what those witnesses say makes sense. So, does it make sense that Sarah hung herself in broad daylight, less than 25 feet away from the defendant? Distance and time. Both of these are measured in certainties. Unlike a story, they cannot be manipulated, they cannot be altered. 12 inches is always a foot, and 60 seconds is always a minute. And when the EMTs arrived at the scene on May 20th, 2015, you're going to hear that those measurements did not add up to any of the stories the defendant told. Now, you're going to hear about forensics in this case, but this isn't Law & Order and this isn't CSI. We don't have a giant screen that's going to come down from the roof and show you holographic images. That's not this case. This case is about common sense. And it's about applying that common sense to realize what actually happened that day. Now, this case is not perfect, and this investigation is not perfect. But that doesn't mean that at the end of this trial, the evidence isn't going to show that beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is the highest burden in our judicial system. But that doesn't mean the case has to be perfect. It doesn't mean an absolute certainty. What it means is beyond any sort of reasonable doubt. And that is a burden we gladly accept in this case, because at the end of this case, the evidence will be clear. And that's when we'll ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
What will Mr. Savage have to say? That's up next. Defense opening statements after this. This is Court TV Live. Welcome back to our gavel-to-gavel coverage of South Carolina versus Michael Collucci. The 49-year-old dad is accused of killing his second wife, Sarah. She was 38 years old when she died, and the circumstances are mysterious, to say the very least. Police believe he used a garden hose to strangle her to death. He says she accidentally hung herself with that garden hose, but when you look at the crime scene, whoa, it's hard to imagine how either one of those scenarios played out. So let's take another listen to the defense attorney's opening statement.
Please support.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Madam Lady and members of the jury. I'm Andy Savage. We were introduced yesterday. Sitting with me is Michael Collucci and my wife, Cheryl, who works with me 24/7. A person I've had arguments with, I guess, from time to time as well. You know, there's something special about you, individually. When you get back in the jury room, you can look at each other and say, why me? You're one of less than 5% of the people in this community who were asked to come to court by the clerk and who were selected to hear and determine the evidence in this case. This is quite a bit for you. There are people who were released for whatever reason, who were not chosen. There was even a gentleman this morning who was released because the court felt that that person could not look at the evidence and without prejudice determine the facts of the case. So congratulate yourselves. You know, the burden of being a juror is significant. Some of you work for yourselves and there's a monetary loss of payment for you and your family. It's difficult to come here every day. It's difficult to sit here. It's difficult to listen to lawyers. And for that, I thank you. There's no greater service than what you're doing at this moment than those of you who have worn the uniform and served in the military. This is the highest calling of a citizen, to sit in judgment of the facts of a case that could take away the freedom of a fellow citizen. This is not about money. You know, this same courtroom is used to determine who's responsible in a wreck case or who may be involved in a medical case or some other tort. But in those cases, the burden of proof, if you will, what you have to decide on is, if you can imagine Lady Justice blind and tipping ever so slightly. That's the burden of proof. That's the measurement you must make in determining who's at fault. A civil case about money. Because we're talking about somebody's freedom, that burden of proof is much greater, and the scales of justice must turn that much further. So that's the prism in which you look at this case. What you can look at is what is testified to from the witness stand, the exhibits that are introduced, the photographs, the DNA, all the scientific material that will come to your attention. But you can also determine this case based on what the state does not present. So when you look at the evidence, some things that I like to suggest that you look for. This is a married couple. Anyone that's married knows that everything's not always hunky-dory. Look for prior acts of violence. Look for a history on the part of this defendant of violence. Words are cheap. When you look at the evidence, look at the words made by the deceased, was in text messages and verbally. Look for his responses. Look for the measurement of love that this husband had for his wife. Look for the distortion in their lives caused by alcohol and drugs. Look for the evidence of psychiatric intervention to help with the mental health issues of the deceased. Look for her prior lifestyle in terms of her prior marriages, and particularly her second marriage, who on the anniversary of her death.
Objection.
Basis.
Argument, fact, not in evidence.
Approach, please.
Okay, they're approaching a sidebar. Savage has a bit of a smirk on his face. Meanwhile, his client was getting very flushed, red in the face. Not sure if water was coming out of those eyes, but he did reach for the tissues and was blotting his eyes. And Savage is talking about the evidence, not something you expect from the defense. You expect that from the prosecution. Okay, let's go back into the courtroom.
Before that interruption, we were talking about the things you can look at. And one of those is the prior lifestyle of the victim and the fact that her second marriage, anniversary of the second husband's death, and the marriage anniversary was on the date that she died. I just say look for that. And why do I say look for that? Because it's up to you to measure what impact that may have had on her state of mind and what she was doing and what she was thinking on that day. And you can look for the history of that, not just on this occasion, but her mental health treatment for that particular obsession. So, as the state provides testimony and as they give instances of conduct, what you will see then is, well, what else is there? What is there about this evidence that there's an explanation for? And that explanation does not have to be given by the defendant. The burden is on the state of South Carolina. And let's see what their explanation is. I'd ask you to pay very close attention. You're going to see a lot of exhibits. Some of them are going to be uncomfortable, some of the photographs, but they're very important for you to look at the detail. This is not just somebody's opinion about what or what did not happen. I guess you know that there was no arrest in this case for at least a year. I guess you know that as we stand here today, the coroner of Berkeley County has not been able to determine the manner of death, whether it was a suicide, whether it was accidental, or whether it was a homicide. Those charged by the law to make those decisions have not been able to do it. All of the pathologists that examined this case
Objection.
have not been able to.
Basis.
Argument, facts not in evidence.
Sustained. Proceed.
All the pathologists will testify, and you'll hear their testimony about what their opinion is. And because no one else has made a decision, those who are charged statutorily with making that legal determination have failed to do so, it'll be up to you. And you may never know. When you hear all the evidence, you're not going to be able to say, gee, I really don't know. This is a difficult case. It may have been an accident, it may have been a suicide, and it may have been a homicide. And if it is a homicide, which is a technical term, homicide is a death caused by the actions of another, then it'll be up to you then to explore whether or not it's a murder case. But before you get to the elements of murder, you have to determine the elements of the category of death. Accident, suicide, or homicide. A determination that as of today, those who are required by law to make that decision can't do it. Thank you.
There you have it. Savage, the Southern charmer, with his defense opening statement. Let's bring in crime and justice reporter Ted Rollins and criminal defense attorney Jasmine Barber. Ted, you have seen Mr. Savage at work.
Yes,
and
it's quite a sight.
He's so melodic. Like, I'm just believing everything he's saying.
Yeah, he's melodic at times, but he can be a firecracker at times. He is. Our viewers are going to love this trial for many reasons. But Andy Savage is one of them because he brings it and he has so much experience. He can pounce on any opening that is given to him by the circumstances of the case, and the theatrics are just, he'll surprise you. It goes from melodic and calm to another level in an instant if he needs to. He's just a very engaging, classic Southern attorney.
What do you think so far, Jasmine, about his style and his presentation?
I mean, if I'm comparing him just to the state and as far as mannerisms and style, I think he is winning right now. I mean, I am mesmerized by what he is saying. He instantly drew me in, and in his opening statement, I think he hit a lot of really high points.
Ted, did you notice when you've seen him in court before, does he not use notes?
He refers to them when he needs to, but he's very comfortable in that he'll stop everything and say, hold on. I am going to mosey on over to my desk, pick up the note that I need to get, and get back at it. I mean, it's very engaging, and it's where someone who doesn't have their notes normally gets nervous and runs to get them.
Sure.
He's like, oh, hold on, everybody, and just goes over there. He's running the show.
It seems like it is very apropos of the South. Like, let's take a break and have some sweet tea and then go back to the lectern. Because, right, usually, Jasmine, I'm sure you see the same thing. When we try cases, we take our whole folder and we go to the lectern and we have all our notes. And heaven forbid we forget something, and then we have to ask and we get nervous and go back. But this guy is just, on the fly. What were some of the high points that you said, he hit them in the defense opening statement that you took notice of?
One of the things that I like that he did, I think it's typically a state's move, but he immediately empowered the jury. He's like, you guys are important. You are the 5%. You were chosen for a reason to be on this jury. And so I think empowering the jury and then laying a roadmap and giving them so many ways to come out of a guilty verdict was something he did expertly.
Were you surprised that he kept saying the evidence will show, the evidence will show, which is something you usually hear from prosecutors?
I think I am a little bit surprised by that, but based on what the background that we know about the case, I think it was a smart move. I think he's going to be focused on poking holes at every single thing that the state has to say.
And Ted, what is the deal with his wife sitting at the is she a lawyer?
No, but she is part of the team, that's for sure, and he introduces her and he likes to refer to her. They are, as he said in his opening, together 24/7. They are always together. They're a team, and they're just the cutest thing.
They really are the cutest thing. And you know, it's tough, I think, for us to report and analyze this case because it is a tragedy. It's the worst type of tragedy involving a marriage. And then right on display next to the accused is this very long relationship that's flourished over decades now. Yeah. And she's part of the team.
Absolutely, integral part.
She's part of the, okay, so Jasmine, I didn't get your thoughts on the prosecutors because I'm sure you were you had your stopwatch going because the defense opening statement, I think, was twice as long as the prosecution's.
What did he talked for like 5 minutes, I think. I was completely surprised at how short his opening statement was.
Why do you think that was? Do they think this is a slam dunk? I don't think it's a slam dunk. It's a real mystery.
Maybe he's worried about over-promising and under-delivering, so he wanted to keep it short and sweet and say, hey, I don't want to say anything wrong and then turn out to not be able to keep my promise.
Which is usually what the defense worries about.
Right.
Okay, and Ted, there seems to be a very lengthy witness list on both sides here. Usually we're used to seeing, 50, 60 witnesses from the prosecution, so few from the defense, but it looks like it's even Steven.
Yeah, and in every trial we cover the witness list, and the actual witnesses that actually appear are different, especially on the defense side. You always have a witness list on the defense team, and maybe one or two actually show up, or sometimes zero. So we'll have to wait and see, but you're right. Lots of witnesses. Okay,
we are going to take you back inside the courtroom. We're going to take a quick break right here. More Court TV Live on the other side.
Tonight on Court TV.
Opening statements in a brand new trial on Court TV. Sarah Collucci was found dead with a garden hose wrapped around her neck. Her husband's been charged with murder, but he says his wife died either by suicide or by accident. Plus, we'll take you inside the Kevin Spacey case as the defense makes accusations against the accuser.
Closing arguments with Vinnie Politan. Tonight, starting at 6/5 Central on the all-new Court TV.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We will take you back to South Carolina versus Michael Collucci in a moment. But first, we want to get you an update on a story out of Arizona, where 28-year-old Brittany Zamora just accepted a plea deal admitting that she engaged in sexual activity with one of her 6th grade students. Yeah, I said 6th grade. The boy was 12 years old when it happened. The parents of the victim became suspicious when the boy's behavior changed and he started shutting his door when he was at home. So they installed an app on his phone and they discovered racy text messages between him and his teacher. A judge could sentence Zamora to as low as 13 years or as much as 27 years in prison. Sentencing is set for July 12th. Let's bring back in criminal defense attorney Jasmine Barber. Jasmine, we have heard stories like this about female teachers, male students for years. What's the famous one? Mary Letourneau. Thank you, Emily. Mary Letourneau. So we've heard these stories for years, but can you even think of something as egregious as a 12-year-old boy?
It's difficult to think of anything more egregious than that. And, how a 27-year-old teacher who is entrusted to the care and the education of these children can, then turn that into a romantic relationship is kind of beyond my understanding.
And you made some interesting comments to me about this case that you noticed. about how the sexual activity was unfolding?
Yeah, I think that, they pointed out that it started as text messages, but then the behavior just seemed to continue to escalate. I think one of the allegations from the case is that she fondled her victim in the back of a classroom full of students while showing an educational video. And I just think that's pretty bold and brazen on her behalf.
Do you think, because she clearly has no fear of getting caught. She's doing this in such an, okay, so we're seeing that looks like Brittany Zamora being taken when she was arrested, and she's getting in the back of the car, and we can see that right now. But she did it was so brazen. Do you think, in your experience as a criminal defense attorney, you've handled hundreds, if not thousands of cases, do you think this is symptomatic of some type of psychological problem this woman has?
If I were her defense attorney, I definitely would want to have her evaluated, because I think the difference between a 13-year sentence and a 27-year sentence is going to be based on those circumstances, whether they can show aggravating or mitigating circumstances.
Right. And I think one other piece of this is and it's almost like an outsider's perspective, is how society looks at this. And so many times we see victims of sexual assaults or sexual offenses being women, and this is a little boy. And from the research that at least I did and the case file that I looked at, there were so many acts that she brought up that he should perform, talking about oral sex, things like that. And it sounded like he didn't even know what these words were.
And taking education to the next level, right? I'm hoping she's not teaching sex education, but she's obviously taking this at the time 12, then 13-year-old boy well out of his comfort zone, well below the age of consent. And I'm at a loss for words, honestly.
Yes, no, right. And I just, and I wanted, this is one interesting thing, because of course, they do these forensic interviews of, and I'm going to call him a child because he was a child and he is a child, but in the forensic interview, I think what really hit home and corroborated his veracity was that he mentioned a brown birthmark that she had in her genital area, and that was corroborated that she did in fact have that. But how does this young boy recover from this type of trauma that he's been inflicted?
First question is, will he ever recover? But I'm sure it will take years and years of therapy in order to recover from something like this.
Vinnie Politan and I, we were talking about this earlier today, and it's very analogous to the Michael Jackson case. A lot of the accusers in the Michael Jackson child molestation, they came forward after being grown men and talked about it, and they said they did not even realize that they were victims of a crime until they were much older, until the therapy, until being, a grown-up, and until looking at relationships saying, wait a minute, that's not normal, that's not normal. So this young man still may not understand that he is a victim of a crime. And luckily, this is what prosecutors are there for, right? To protect the innocent.
Absolutely, the prosecutors as well as his parents, kudos to them for recognizing that his behavior was off to them and, wanting to look a little bit deeper and uncovering what was going on in his life at such a young age.
Jasmine Barber, thank you so much. We'll keep you right here. More to South Carolina versus Michael Collucci after this break. This is Court TV.
There's no way she would ever go into a dirty alley and put a garden hose around her neck. That's ridiculous. If you had said she made herself look beautiful and maybe took some pills because she was depressed, I would believe that, but I did not believe and do not believe the alley story at all. Not one part of it. It's ludicrous.
That is Sarah Collucci's friend, Stephanie Merrill, flat out rejecting the defense theory that Sarah Collucci killed herself with a garden hose back in 2015. Sarah was 38 years old when she died. She and Michael Collucci had been married for almost 3 years, and they seemed to have a happy marriage. However, after her death, investigators discovered they were both living beyond their means. They had money problems, that she had drug and alcohol issues, and that they were arguing about divorce. And some of the text messages between them that police recovered from her phone are just brutal. They are brutal in both language and tone. Let's bring in Court TV's Vinnie Politan and criminal defense attorney Jasmine Barber. Okay, so this is a text message exchange between Sarah and Michael Collucci from October 5th, 2014, about 6 months before Sarah's death. Sarah to Michael, I do not love you, I do not love you, I do not love you, I do not love you. You are a bleep bleep with offspring to prove it. Get out now. Get your bleep and get out. I do not want to be married to a complete stupid bleep like you any longer. Oh, and you are a bleep. Okay, so those were the 2014 text messages, and they've only been married for 2 years. Vinny?
Yeah, it was a volatile marriage. And the question is something like that, is that a motive for murder? Is that what could drive someone to kill someone if you're living in a situation like that? And I think that's a question that this jury's gonna have to answer.
Okay, so Jasmine, just to be clear, those were her from him, but does it still set up motive for him to have done this to her?
Wait, these are her messages?
Yeah,
or?
those were her to him. I just said that, her to
I
him.
think that...
Sorry, not you. I'm talking to myself.
I think that the defense kind of previewed this in his opening statement when he said, look for prior violence and then look for the love. And so I'm more interested in seeing what was his response to these messages.
Okay, we are going to take you there. Now, their relationship didn't seem to be in much better shape after about 6 months later when Sarah texted Michael on April 22nd. Here are some of the text messages. Don't come back here. I don't need your bleep another night. I'm going with Karen to see her attorney tomorrow. Enough is enough for me. Okay, so I think I have one more. Okay, so I'm not going to read that. But another one from her essentially says, we don't have that up there, but one essentially says, our marriage is over, go away. So Jasmine, looking at that, is the motive now almost developing because she's saying, hey, we should get divorced?
I'm so surprised that the prosecution didn't bring this out in his opening statement, because one thing that stuck out to me...
They didn't have time, he only spoke for 4 minutes.
He only spoke for 4 minutes. But I've been asking, what is his motive? It seemed like he loved her so much, and the defense obviously pointed to his love towards her. So I'm surprised they didn't preview this text message in their state's opening.
Okay, let me give you some ones that he responded with.
Sure.
And this was May 18th at about 5:30 p.m. One is, you are a whore of humanity. The next one, I hate your guts. This is her to him. Oh, I apologize. I thought we had some of his to her. I apologize. And the other one, I will call your 71-year-old relative and speak to she or him in a negative light. I would expect divorce papers. Okay, so again, sorry, that's her to him again. And Vinny, your assessment of those horrific messages that one spouse is sending to another.
And I think if there's a point where, like, then there's text messages where they love each other, this is volatility. This is not a happy marriage. This is not a happy home. Inside, fueled by money problems, fueled by alcohol. You put those together and it comes out, you're bleeding out in these text messages, you can tell things just aren't right there. And when things aren't right, and I think it can lead in two directions. It can lead to someone who is so depressed that they could kill themselves, or it could lead that one person would want to kill someone else. One spouse would kill the other. So I think it plays to actually both theories here.
Right, and I think at least one of the children is on the witness list. So I would be interested, Jasmine, wouldn't you want to hear from the children as to the state of this marriage?
I absolutely would love to hear from their perspective, because if you just look at these text messages, it definitely looks all bad. But I would like to see maybe a witness from the defense's list, or several corroborating witnesses that are like, there was love here. It was not just volatility.
And there's nobody better who can speak to that than the kids, because especially this is a blended family. So these children, they have already experienced separation by their parents. Her previous husband passed away very tragically, but at the same time, this is an environment that's not healthy for children.
No, it isn't. And when you have a blended family like that, and then you have someone dies, I've seen other cases that we've covered through the years on Court TV where oftentimes that will split the kids up, and they'll be on the side of their, blood parent rather than their step parent, and it's devastating for the entire family when all this happens. So difficult.
We have another set of text messages again from her to him, and this is 2 days before she died. Michael, this is Sarah. You need to leave. I don't love you like I did before your loss. I need to be happy. Goodbye, freak. And this time, Michael Collucci replied. Okay, this is one from Michael Collucci. It's not for me to answer. You keep doing and saying and everything else. I am no freak. What wife would say what you say? Pool boy in my bed. Put me on the phone with your family that is just as confused as you and them all. Sorry, just as confused as you and them all. Call me a gay bleep. Wake up, will you please? Okay, so those were the first messages I was able, we were able to read for you from him to her. So now, Jasmine, what are you thinking? What kind of assessment can you make about his state of mind when he was writing those text messages just 2 days before her death?
I definitely think that he, even though his thoughts seem a little bit discombobulated, he wasn't name calling, he wasn't speaking in the same vile tone. It sounds like he was defending himself a little bit more than going on the attack towards her.
Vinny, to me, he seemed much calmer, defensive, but there wasn't like the vitriol in the text from her to him.
Right, a little bit different. And what happened that day? If we're saying he killed her, she could have come after him first or could have gotten violent, and he's perhaps trying to fight back, then he loses his temper. I mean, you just don't know what's going to happen in a situation like that, which is why I think a lot of this plays very well to the prosecution case in explaining how bad things were inside. It's a bad marriage.
I think
Bottom line, it's a bad marriage.